Hello, my friends, and welcome to this edition of the Art and Mind Village Lab. I'm Fred Johnson, artist in residence, Arts and Health Initiative here at the Straz Center for the Performing Arts. So happy to be with you again, along with my illustrious co-host, the executive director of the Art and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins University, Susan Mag Salmon. Susan, here we are again, second season. It's pretty exciting.
Very exciting. Very, very wonderful.
So for those of you who were with us last year, welcome back. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, this village chat, this opportunity for art and science to come together is truly a collaboration between the Performing Arts Center and the Art and Mind Lab to really explore and amplify the conversation about the importance of art in all of its genres as modalities for health and well-being for the community. Last season, we really took a journey with primarily with artists, really kind of sharing their excitement, their dreams, their visions, and their understanding of how art is important for them and their individual lives for their health and well-being, and their intentions in terms of sharing art as real modalities to help people to feel better, to enrich their lives, to really amplify the body's ability to be whole and healthy and complete. And along with that, we were able to really have a shared conversation between artists and researchers and scientists about data and real important data that is being compiled more and more every day about this important journey. This year, this season, Susan, we're really venturing into the opportunity to really take a look at some specific case studies. So would you share a little bit about how you felt about last season and where we're headed now and as we move into this first program?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's really a pleasure to be back and working again, Fred, with you. Last year we met every Friday morning, and we will do that again this season. And I have to say, it totally made my week. We talked with amazing artists in many genres, looking really deeply at what made them want to do what they do and how they really had this intuitive sense about what they did and how it mattered and how it felt in a very sort of embodied way. And I think I gained an even greater appreciation for performing arts and the way that actors move their bodies and find words to help us empathize, or looking at expressive writing and the way the act of putting words and intentions on paper literally changed neural pathways. Looking at dance and this idea of the way we think about motor learning and motor to express deep emotions that we don't have words for. So it was really an extraordinary season. And I think it compelled us to see if we could marry these arts and sciences together to show examples of programs that are taking the artist's passion and knowledge, along with what we know about the body and brain and behavior, and begin to say, these things are coming together. They are happening. We're seeing them all over the world, and we're seeing them address very difficult issues. Some of them are physical, some of them are mental, health oriented, and some of them are around prevention and well-being. And so some of them are for the individual, and some of them are about the collective. And I think this ability for the arts to be so responsive to humanity is something that we're hoping to be able to show in more case study models this season. So really looking forward to sharing a number of those programs over the next several months.
Fantastic. Well, we start out with our first case study today, and we are honored to welcome all of the wonderful folks who are here with us today. So, Susan, I will let you take it away and really lead us into our journey with One Book.
Great. Well, thanks, Fred. I am really proud that this is our first case study because it happens in Baltimore, which is where we are located at Johns Hopkins Arts and Mind Lab. I am from Baltimore, and I am very, very happy to see the collaborations that are happening within our community. So we're going to talk about a project called One Book. And this project started several years ago that really was an idea to think about how we bring middle school students primarily together to talk about complicated issues. And we decided on this concept around bibliotherapy, or using fiction, using narrative as a way to help children understand the world, but also understand themselves, and to lay the foundation for a much broader conversation within the community. So we will talk today with the folks that actually brought this idea to Baltimore, and that includes Staci Van Horn from the T. Rowe Price Foundation, and some of the folks that have been administrating it, including Latricia Milton from the Baltimore City Library, and then David Facundi, who has been one of the researchers on the projects, and Tasha Golden, who is the head of our research program at Johns Hopkins Arts and Mind Lab, who has been studying this along with David and really working in tandem together. So this is a highly interdisciplinary initiative that requires lots of different kinds of perspectives to come together to really understand how to think about this more deeply. So I'd like to start with Staci. And Staci, if you would say a few words about sort of what you do at T. Rowe Price Foundation and a bit about the inspiration for the project, that would be great.
Yes, I'm happy to. So again, my name is Staci Van Horn, and I am with the T. Rowe Price Foundation. My area specifically within the foundation focuses on youth empowerment and the education space. And we do focus the majority of our funding in Baltimore, which is where T. Rowe Price is headquartered. So there's kind of a neat story behind One Book. The president of our foundation, John Brothers, was telling me about a citywide literary effort that he had heard about that had been done in two areas. Northern Virginia is one, and Memphis, Tennessee is another. And those were in response to, in one case, anti-Semitic actions in the activity, and in another case, racist activities. And at about the same time, our CEO of the public school district, Dr. Sanalisis, was speaking about a listening tour she had done with students, and how moved she was and impressed she was by the ways students were expressing themselves and the really profound thoughts that they were expressing. And she felt so strongly that students needed more opportunities to share their voice within the community, as well as more opportunities to really develop that thinking and the different ways that they could share and express their views. And so when I heard her talk about this, I went back to John and said, we've got to share this idea with Dr. Sanalisis. And so that's really how One Book Baltimore was born.
It's amazing. It's really amazing. And this idea of cultivating how you share a voice, that, you know, I think we all think like, oh, we must all know how we share our voice. But in fact, it takes practice and it takes opportunities to be able to do that. Latricia, can you talk a bit about your role in the project and the way that the libraries have been involved?
Sure. I am the project manager of the One Book Baltimore project, and where the libraries come into play with this initiative is we are the ones that partner with the community organizations that help to magnify on the themes of the books that are selected each year for One Book Baltimore. So it's more than just putting the books in the hands of the students. It's bringing in organizations that specifically speak to some of those themes and creating programming around that that's specifically designed for this age group that we're targeting for this program.
So just how it works is the schools disseminate the books to the students, and there are site leads within the schools that help to navigate in the schools, but then there is a coalition between the schools and the libraries. And is it now over 30 organizations, many of them community organizations or cultural arts organizations, that are helping to amplify and find opportunities for the students to share their voices in lots of different forms?
Yes, we partner. Sometimes the authors will come in, like this year, D. Watkins has helped to bring a lot of organizations in partnership with us. And so, yes, we work with the schools. We coordinate school visits with the author. The author will go to the schools. We have a big launch event at the beginning of the program. And we just kind of work with the schools to make sure that there's participation from the students with the programming that we're creating within the library, as well as assisting where needed with the schools and their programming that they have in-house for their students.
It's amazing. It's really extraordinary. So Staci, this is year 3. Can you walk us through the first several years, sort of what books have been chosen and sort of what some of the sort of learning from a very operational point of view has been in, this is a 5-year program. So sort of what's happened so far, just to kind of give us some context to the larger program.
Sure. So we've been fortunate to work with amazing authors, I'll say first off. So Nick Stone was our author for year 1, and then Jason Reynolds for year 2, and now Dee Watkins, who is Baltimore native, is the author for year 3. So that in and of itself has been amazing. Behind the scenes, we have been coordinating and really cultivating relationships all along, as you mentioned, Susan, with more community-based organizations. So we started out with a number of organizations, including, of course, the key partners are Baltimore City Public Schools, the Enoch Pratt Free Libraries, as well as the Baltimore Office for the Promotion of the Arts. And then we've had other organizations, more grassroots, like Baltimore Ceasefire 365 and City Lit and the Maryland Book Bank and Charm and Wide Angle Youth Media. So more and more organizations now, as we get the word out and as they hear about the initiative and experience the initiative, are coming forward. And so I think one of the key aspects of the effort is what Latricia mentioned, is bringing in the authors for the students to engage with them. And I've been to multiple events now with the authors, and it is really just extraordinary to see the students' excitement. They're, I mean, they are just glued to their seats. Their attention is absolutely focused on the authors. The authors have done an amazing job of really relating well to the students. And so bringing out really sincere and genuine questions from the students wanting to understand, how did you get engaged in your field, and what sparked your interest in reading, and how did you get started with writing? And so that's on the one side, and on the other side, there have been facilitated activities and conversations around. The first 2 years were focused on peace and nonviolence. So very purposeful conversations. Youth were trained to facilitate conversations with other youth. So really getting young people engaged in sharing their thoughts about what they read in the book and how did that feel to them and how did that connect with their life in Baltimore. So there have just been so many threads that have been just encouraging and enlightening. And again, hearing the students themselves talk about their lives and how the book has impacted them, and then seeing them express this in different art forms. So some students have written their own poetry, some have created art. In the showcase last year, I think it was 3 or 4 young men recited part of one of Jason Reynolds' chapters in his book. And for me, I think that was one of the most moving things, because you often think, well, middle school boys, you know, they're just not, they're going to sit back and watch. But no, these young men took the initiative to do this together. And to me, that was one of the more powerful opportunities to see the kids engage.
That's extraordinary. You know, one of the things we're learning now is that adolescence, the things that we thought about adolescence are really not bearing out in the research. And that in fact, adolescents are really interested in engagement. They're really interested in testing ideas. They're incredibly empathetic. And so I love that you're working with this middle school adolescent age group, because they're so hungry for the relationships that you're looking to build. And I think we've kind of said, oh no, it's a risk taking an age, but in fact, it's a very curious age, and an age that's really from a neuroplastic point of view, incredibly fertile. So it's just such a sweet spot. Maybe this is a really good time to share a couple of video clips about some of the work that is happening, and also see a little bit from some of the first two authors.
To this year's book, Long Way Down. Now, this covers a lot of serious topics, some of which students here in Baltimore face on a daily basis. It's a story about gun violence, revenge, and decision-making.
So this book is meant to just humanize young people who are dealing with this kind of trauma.
Long Way Down, a book that follows a 15-year-old boy as he decides whether or not to revenge the murder of his older brother. A fictional story about an all-too-real scenario for 8th grader Keasia Baxter.
My sister, she got shot. I lost her, and then my stepdad and my cousin, they got shot too.
It's a terrible situation that has connected her to this award-winning novel.
I like it because I feel as though like more voices should be heard about gun violence and police brutality and all that.
And it's getting those voices heard and opening up a dialogue that led to this book being chosen as this year's One Book Baltimore novel.
We're having community-wide conversations that are led by young people and their families with their fellow neighbors, talking about the issues behind peace and nonviolence, with the book helping them do that.
Now, every 7th and 8th grader in Baltimore will receive a copy of this book. That's nearly 12,000 copies free of charge.
There's so much enthusiasm from the students about it. We know it's going to be a huge success.
A success that Keasia hopes will prevent other families from going through what hers did.
We were only like 13, 14. We have so...
Now, throughout the fall and winter, local libraries will be hosting programs to help families discuss the topics covered in this book. They did it last year, and thousands of families came out. Reporting in Baltimore, I'm Sean Stryker for WJZ.
I really just wanted to address some of the kind of underlying issues that lead people to see Black boys as threats before they see them as people. So Dear Martin follows a 17-year-old African-American boy who, after a traumatic experience with racial profiling, decides to start a journal of letters written to the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to see if Dr. King's teachings still hold up now. You watch him kind of go through his daily life dealing with racism, noticing things that he didn't notice before, and writing these letters to Dr. King to process. And, things don't always go well, but I think that he does, toward the end, no spoilers of course, but he does come out understanding life a little differently than he did going in.
I think that the things that I would really love readers to think about, number one, is decision making. If you are a child, right? If you are a young reader, I want you to think about decision making. If you are an older reader, I want you to think about how difficult it is for young readers and young people to make certain decisions. That there are lots of things happening that we don't know and that we don't see. The other thing, though, is that I want us all to think about the idea of being haunted. And I think that when we say haunted, we always think about ghosts. We always think about anything that is sort of ephemeral or abstract or that is sort of undead, and all these sort of ways that we think about the idea of being haunted. But the truth is, all of us are haunted by something, whether it be haunted by your parents' teachings, haunted by your spiritual practices, haunted by your education, haunted by the bad things, the good things, former loves, right? We all are being haunted and followed around. Everything sticks to us. And I want to sort of really nail that down, because if you are an adult and you are working with young people, it is incumbent upon you to know that everything is going to stick. Everything, every negative thing you say, every positive thing you say, whether you think it's sticking or not, is of no consequence. It is sticking, and you have to know that. And for young people, when you look at your circle, when you look at your friends, when you look at your communities, when you look at your families, remember, it's all sticking. Right? So we have to make choices in order to figure out what can we peel off the best we can and what can we allow to stay. And those are the things that I really, really want people to think really deeply about.
So profound, so extraordinary. Wow. And this year, the book is from a Baltimore author. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and sort of what we're looking at this year?
This year's book is We Speak for Ourselves by D. Watkins, which was very, very appropriate for the type of year that we have had and everything that has transpired inspired, especially in the area of social justice and racism. And this book was written, as I said, by Dee Watkins, who is Baltimore's own. And so I thought that, and those of us who were on the selection committee thought it would be that much more powerful for the young people of this city to see someone who tells his story, that doesn't start out very pretty, but he manages to navigate through life and come up out of those parts of the story that a lot of people don't make it out of. And then within the book, it's also a book of essays. And so within these essays, he also encourages young people to use their voice by telling their story. That just because you're in a certain race, it doesn't mean that everybody's story is the same. And that's why it's important for you to use your voice the way that it needs to be used. And so that's what this year's book is. I think that the students are pretty excited because Dee already had a fingerprint within the school system. And so as we move forward, we're excited to see what comes out of this year's read.
Yeah, I love the part in the book where he first goes on CNN after he does his first article, and he hates it. He's like, he feels like he's just been creamed, and he's like, I'm never doing anything like this again. And all of his friends say, no, man, you've got to go back. You've got to do it because nobody speaks for us. We need to speak for us. And it was this revelation where he realized that he had an obligation to himself, but also to the community. And it's a beautiful book. It's really, it's a hard book to read in many ways, but it really is extraordinary. So this is extraordinary. And I guess I'd love to move to talk a little bit about, we've heard about what this program is. We know what the goals are. We know why we think it's important. And I guess I would also add that the group that actually picks the book is a combination of teachers, students, parents, and other folks within the community. So this is not a book that's a top-down. It really is a community choice and how this one book gets picked every year. And I think that's an important thing to note. Natasha and David, can we talk a bit about what do we think we're learning, to use that S word, what is the science behind this project? And, what can we show in terms of literary arts really helping us to understand ourselves and understand each other better?
Yeah, thank you. The evaluation process for One Book for this past year was really driven by part of the themes of the book. So our desire to learn a little bit more about how the book affected young people was sort of like based on those themes that we saw Jason Reynolds bringing out in the book and that he spoke about in that video that you just saw. So I will share my screen here just for a moment to show you a little bit about what we discovered. We will take a look. So some of the background, Susan mentioned earlier on that the One Book, we sort of decided to look into bibliotherapy. How does reading affect health? So some of the background around that, based on research that indicates that literature, art, and music, if you all are tuning into this video series, you know that the arts in general can normalize discussions and portray experiences about things like violence or experiences of violence, issues that are complex like justice, issues that are stigmatized or sensitive, things like mental health. So based on that, we thought the hypothesis was that reading this book, especially in connection with middle school students all around the city, could help students improve their well-being, could also amplify and increase access really to difficult narratives about difficult and complex topics, could mitigate the stigma of discussing those experiences and topics, and provide a safe opportunity for ongoing discussion. So, and then from the literature, if you all are interested, we can make some of this literature available to you, but we know that shared reading, reading the same book with other people at any age level, but including adolescents, can improve social connection, can help with recollection and response to difficult life events, can increase self-awareness, can provide opportunities for social play, and I cannot read this last one because my Zoom video is in the middle. Oh, can increase cognitive, emotional, and social development. So we wanted to see the extent to which this actually occurred. And our findings in general suggested that One Book Baltimore could increase critical dialogue among the participants, amplify youth voice, and supplement current curricula and programming that was being offered in schools and the libraries. So David and I will kind of partner here to share some of the findings with you. But to begin that process, we saw that 49% of the students or their family members had reported that they had seen or experienced street violence at least once. And the most prominent kind, they were given a chance to say what's the type of violence that you experienced, and the most prominent was gun violence among students and who responded to our surveys. After reading the book, we saw that students wanted more city events that were discussing peace and nonviolence, and that increased throughout the program. So 47% before they read the book and almost 60% after they read the book. Students also said that they wanted more opportunities to discuss peace and nonviolence with specific groups. They wanted more opportunities to discuss it with peers. That was the biggest increase that you can see, almost 22%. They also wanted more opportunities to discuss peace and nonviolence with their family members and with their teachers. We can see that the percentage of increase for teachers is really small, and we wonder if that's because they had a lot of opportunities to talk about it with their teachers, because the program was providing those opportunities within school classrooms. Engagement levels, 94% of students said that they read Long Way Down, 70% of them finished the book. 58% of them participated in One Book Baltimore activities, and 14% of them attended out-of-school events. So the biggest part of the engagement participation was within the schools in Baltimore. We wanted to know, did they actually discuss this book with their friends? Because part of what we hoped was that this would increase dialogue. And yes, 84% of respondents who finished the book had discussed it with their friends, and even people who didn't finish the book, most of them still discussed it with their friends. And we wanted to know, did this book influence your thinking about violence? And yes, 74% of the people who finished the book said that it did influence their thinking. And again, still the majority of people who did not finish the book said that it influenced their thinking. And engagement levels for programming it within the school and outside of the school, we saw that 40% of the library branches said that they didn't engage students to the extent that they hoped, but those whose activities involved local partnership reported that they had higher engagement than those who didn't. So we saw that there was an interest, like Latricia was mentioning earlier, all these partners that they've been able to work with has been enhancing the extent to which students are interested in engaging with this process. And here I am going to toss it to David to talk with you about focus groups.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity before the pandemic shut everything down to engage in 2 focus groups in South Baltimore schools, so Marie Garnett Faring Elementary Middle School and Holabird Academy. I had a total of 23 total participants. They were 7th and 8th graders, mostly female and mostly Black and Latinx. During our sessions, which were about 30 minutes, I utilized storytelling as the primer. So instead of just going in and asking the questions, many of which were based from the questionnaires that many of the students and their families and other participants received, I wanted to start with kind of the overall concept of Long Way Down, which was around death. So I presented a folktale from my tradition, the African oral tradition, called Searching for Death. So after I told the story and gave the students some time to reflect, I asked them the question, have you ever gone searching for death? And I got a range of answers, and quite a few of them said yes. The point was not to frame the question in any particular route, but more so, if you have experienced death, what were the feelings that came of that? Was it anger? Was it rage? Was it sorrow? Was it trauma? And many of my respondents said yes, they had experienced those feelings, and some of them felt an urge to take revenge or to seek some type of retribution for the death that they had experienced, or even wanted to experience death themselves. So it was a wide range of emotions that these students were sharing with me, just answering that simple question, simple yet very complex, have you ever gone searching for death? So afterwards, I then transitioned to asking some of the standard questions from the questionnaire. Had you read the book? Did you enjoy the book? What were your thoughts on the book? Things of that matter. We also asked questions about some of the major concepts in the book, particularly the Code of the Street. So if anyone's familiar with that book, Code of the Street by Elijah Anderson, it talks about these unwritten rules that we find in many urban areas, particularly non-white areas in the U.S., about how you conduct yourself in the streets. So some of my observations were that my participants all read the book, and most of them enjoyed the book. What was also very telling, but unfortunately not very surprising, is that nearly every respondent had an exposure to violence, whether they witnessed violence, whether they committed violence, or whether they contemplated violence. But what was very encouraging was that creative expression was a very common coping mechanism for dealing with anger, stress, whatever we'll say detrimental feelings or detrimental thoughts the students may have had. So whether it was singing, whether it was visual art, whether it was dancing, they turned to arts and creativity to manage their emotions and to manage their thoughts. So I thought that was a great thing to experience as an artist and as well as a mental health researcher. And the focus groups overall were just an opportunity to obtain greater depth in their insight. So we know that the questionnaires gave us some level of insight, but with these opportunities to talk to students with more time and to ask them more questions and to give them more space to formulate their thoughts and their insight, we were able to get some greater depth as to how they saw the book and how they saw the concepts that the book discussed.
Yeah, thank you so much. We also developed some recommendations based on the findings that we developed, and we can chat about that later when we talk about moving this project forward.
Great.
You know, I want to just share that one of the things that really impacts me the most hearing this journey with One Book is a lot of what is being talked about in the arts world and the theater world now. I think one of the most powerful elements here is that young people read books where they were able to see themselves, where they were able to relate to. You know, in many instances, our experiences with books are there are a collection of books that are selected, that are recommended for young people to read, that helps to expand their ability to read or their ability to understand or their ability to understand sentence structure. The beauty here is that, you know, just hearing those young people in the clips being able to really, maybe for the very first time, say, this has happened to me. I think that the power in the relativity, and David, your point that in the young people that you spoke with, that they utilized in order to management is a really, this is not a term that's heard a lot in having conversations about something happens to you in your life. What do you do with that? And the idea of being able to manage it through creative expression, you know, or being able to read a book and have that book come alive within you because it speaks to a reality that you understand, I think is one of the most important places that we are now, even in terms of having a broader conversation about that, so that it feels to me like what a research or a study that's done that really creates a format where people can live a reality that is meaningful to them, and it's quantifiable by them saying, yes, I've lived this, yes, I understand this, this is not, I don't need to go to a place in my imaginative mind in order to relate to this story. I can merely allow it, in any, if anything, it opens up my soul because it's an expression that I understand. And I think that's really one of the most important things that art is about, whether it's literary art or whether it's, you know, tangible physical art. Being able to see yourself. You know, many times in the theater, we have that conversation where people say it was a great play, but you know, I wasn't there. You know, I mean, all the elements were there, but I wasn't there, you know. I mean, uh, these books that have been selected. So I really, really applaud you. I mean, there's so many opportunities, and I'm glad to hear that you have many other community organizations, because that's the ultimate goal too, is how might the community at large connect to expand, if nothing else, for a child to recognize, I see you, I hear you, and I recognize that there are some things about your reality that I need to know more clearly. And the other is, and for the child to be able to say, when do I get to speak and really feel like I'm being heard? And these books help them to realize that they're a real part of being able to be heard. That's so important. I really applaud you all for the work that you're doing.
I would just add to that that not only when do I get to speak, they are invited to speak, right? They're encouraged to speak. And I think, what, just to double down on a couple of things that were just said. One is that the books are contextual to the community. So they're not reading about white kids. They're reading about kids that are like them. They can see themselves. And this is similar in performance, in theater arts as well, where you can play out a character in a safe way, right? You have the ability to be able to try on that character with less risk. So you're able to explore emotions in a safe space. You're able to feel those emotions in a safe space, and you're able to try on different modes of behavior change in a safe space, right? And then you're able to share that and play with it, right? You use the word manage. I also think the word process is really important here, where you're processing how you're feeling through creative expression. You're bringing up the unconscious. And I think this idea of having a touch point like the book to allow those things to be opened up in a safe space, and then to be able to share your voice, is something that we're seeing tremendous power in. And I think it would be really maybe a nice segue here is to move into this idea of, we've seen a lot of shifts. So what are the recommendations? How are you all feeling about where do we go from here? How do we take what we've learned and go to that next level? And maybe Staci and Latricia, maybe you guys go first, and then we'll go to Tasha and David to kind of share some of that in a more formal way.
Sure, I'll jump in. I'd love to share another example that really, really touched me so last year, for the first time, we did a student showcase at the conclusion of the programming. And so a number of young people engaged in a variety of different ways, but they essentially were performing in front of the other attendees. And there was a young woman who acted out a poem she had written. And there were some edgy aspects and edgy language in her poem. And then a little bit later in the program, there was a question asked about, how reading the book had affected you personally. And she chose to answer, and her answer reflected such a level of humility and self-awareness. And I was so struck by that. And I thought, even as adults, we're all trying to figure out the world around us, and how much more so for kids in middle school, right? And so the authenticity and the maturity that she showed, and just holding both of these dynamics within herself, but also the ability to express herself in that way, for me, again, was really profound to witness that. So I think that leads me a little bit to where do we want to take this? And Latricia, in partnership with Dee Watkins, is doing a masterful job. Of course, we have the challenge of COVID this year, because a lot of the power of the programming is to be able to gather together. And so Latricia and Dee Watkins, the author, are really doing an amazing job of bringing more partners to the table. So the Pratt libraries are still offering a number of programs, which of course are virtual, but the goal is to really bring new community organizations into the fold, and to really think of just continuing to have more creative ways to engage youth. And again, as we mentioned, youth voice is sort of the theme this year. And I do think Dee's book lends itself really nicely to that, in the fact that it's the way that it is written is essentially a compilation of essays. So I think that makes it more digestible. It makes it easier for schools potentially to weave that into their programming without having to read an entire book, but being able to pepper aspects of that book throughout different curriculum. So, so I'm excited about that, and I think we're really pushing forward in a pretty powerful way, even with having to work through the issues surrounded with the pandemic. Latricia, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And the pandemic specifically has caused us to be stretched creatively, I think, in a way that we didn't have to think about before. One of the things that we did this year that we had never done before was one of the essays in the book. Dee and I worked with a cartoonist to recreate that into a cartoon to kind of open up the launch for this year, and I think it went over very, very well. And so that was a creative element that we probably never would have thought about had we not been in this situation. So I think one of the things as we move forward is taking a more out of the box creative perspective when looking at how do we present the program, especially being in Baltimore, because Baltimore is a creative place. There are a lot of creative people here. And I've just noticed that if things are done the traditional way, they're least likely to get the attention of the people that we're targeting. So the element of creativity, I think, is something that we should probably pay more attention to as we move forward, as well as like Staci was mentioning about the talent showcase. I think that that was a good touch at the end of last year's program because it gave students that space to be able to share in a safe space without any opinions being brought to the table, but just letting them talk about how they were impacted, how they were affected by the selected book. And then, like she said, for a lot of them, there were certain questions that were asked throughout the night. And as they answered those questions, it was really eye-opening to know that these young people had experienced so much at such a young age, and the fact that they are still kind of pushing through life, you know, to get to a certain endpoint. So I think overall, those are some things that we should keep in mind. And I think that with that, it also gives young people the courage and the confidence to speak up, even if they're not invited, but to feel comfortable speaking up and saying what they have to say, no matter, you know, no matter what that is, because their voices matter.
Tasha, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that you and David have been thinking about?
Yeah, sure. There were, I think, 5 or 6 altogether. I'll go through the first through pretty quickly, and then first few really quickly, and then tell you more about the latter ones. But the first recommendation, if you are thinking about doing a similar program in your area, is to consider developing a youth leadership team so that young people can have a meaningful part of like the entire process from beginning to end. We have research showing from youth development that typically makes programs even more effective. The ability for young people to know exactly what they need, what they and their peers are going to respond to. So having that youth leadership team that's making selections and determining what the events are going to be and involve and things like that can be really great. The second and third recommendations kind of went together with developing plans for project management and consistent communication that we saw some of the times when young people were less engaged with, for example, the out of school activities had to do with just things that didn't align with their calendars as teenagers, or just they didn't learn about the event early enough, or they learned about an event, but it wasn't really clear what that event was. So they weren't sure that they were interested in it. So those kinds of things can help. And similarly, just really practical things that if you've worked in schools or educational situations, you're aware of. How do you increase student engagement? How do you incentivize in a meaningful way for them? the learning process. So things like offering extra credit, teachers offering extra credit for reading the book, or for example, maybe extra credit for attending a book discussion or for leading a book discussion, but just integrating some of those. And then, like we mentioned, that some of the engagement increased when there was a partnership with local artists, local poets, other partners. So considering in your community, if you're thinking about something like this, who are the arts partners, and then other partners as well that will bring these kinds of events and extracurricular activities to life for young people. And then the last couple that maybe I'll go ahead and share these couple of slides with you, just because they can be helpful to see in a larger way. But expanding arts-based activities, we talked about these opportunities that young people had and took and really responded to when they had this book to read together and wanted to process and manage their feelings in response. So if you're considering a similar program, to just prioritize and expand those creative activities, that they're not something that's nice to have in addition to the reading of the book, but that they should be a foundational part of the process. We know from the research that arts-based activities increase engagement and social connection, but they also have these physical and physiological and mental health benefits that are really important. And, Maya Angelou's quote here, there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. And reading a compelling story, Fred mentioned this earlier, it provides students with a model for sharing their own experiences and can help start that sharing process. We want to make sure that if they're feeling sort of, I want to start the sharing process, that there's a platform and an opportunity for them to really take that up. And we know that arts-based communication can broaden what young people are able and willing to share. And that means that the art they create can become a kind of data that we can look at, that young people are regularly willing to share more via the arts than they would just share one-on-one or via surveys or things like that. And that can become a really meaningful way for institutions and schools and different organizations to really learn what's on young people's minds, what are their priorities and needs and assets and strengths. And the very last one was our recommendation was to host a large-scale, high-profile, citywide youth event. Of course, this is harder when there's a pandemic. So Latricia in the One Book program is doing a phenomenal job figuring out how to give young people during this pandemic a high-profile platform and really meaningful opportunities to have their voices heard. So this helps us to recognize that young people are key contributors to systems change, because they are. And so giving them a platform becomes really important. Co-designing this with your youth leadership team would be really wonderful if you can. Offering cash and scholarship prizes can help make it meaningful for young people's labor and participation, and inviting high-profile folks to be part of that. This is true for any arts endeavor, but if you can invite civic leaders and policymakers to be a part of the event in some way, it raises the stakes. It makes sure that those leaders hear the young people when they're speaking from their platform, and can also help getting some earned media for your program. And definitely elevates youth stories and experiences. We actually advised also having visual arts experiences and provided some examples of some of these kinds of higher profile events that young people have taken part in, like Brave New Voices and Climate Speaks, if you want to check those out. But like I said, please keep following the work of One Book Baltimore this year, because there's some really wonderful opportunities that Latricia could speak to about providing young people an opportunity to be published or to have their work featured on websites and things like that. That's really exciting.
Wonderful. And David, anything you wanted to add to that?
So I would say overall, the message that I took out of my interaction with kids, the students, and what I've seen with the data is two things. Definitely a need for greater autonomy, a greater power in overseeing the work that is aimed to help them, and then really creating a space, as Tasha beautifully explained, for them to tell their story. So in my limited interaction with the students, and I wish I had more time, but COVID-19 said otherwise, it was apparent to me as a storyteller that many of them were ready to tell their story. Mm-hmm. And I'm not quite sure how many opportunities they have to tell their story. So when we see the data that shows even reading part of Long Way Down led them to want to talk about those larger issues of peace and nonviolence, particularly with their peers, which we would expect, the fact that they're dealing with adolescence. That's great. Now, how are we going to further support that? What other spaces are we creating within school, outside of school, among family, among peers, among community members, where youth can genuinely tell their story. So I appreciate Staci talking about the one piece that young sister performed that was raw, that was edgy, but those are the stories that we need to hear. And they may not always be pretty, but they are the truth. That was that girl's truth. And there are many other truths that need to be shared. And that, turning to, my scientific side, that is the context, not bias. That is the context that is necessary for these type of interventions to be efficacious, but also effective. So the more opportunities that we create for youth to be able to share their stories, the better we'll be at helping them be the best that they can be.
And if we can do that, I would say one recommendation that I would think about is how do we become better listeners as the community, and how do we witness better? Because I think when there is such a raw demonstration of truth, I don't think as a community we're always prepared to know how to hold that space for others and understand it. And I think there's something about that in terms of being more human and building humanity there. We will be providing additional information on where you can go to learn more about One Book and also get more information. So I think, we hope that you will embrace this One Book concept. So in closing, let me turn it back to Fred. Fred, would you like to take us out?
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Susan, and thanks to you all. This is an amazing opportunity. I think, again, one of the really important and powerful aspects of One Book is that young people are coming together. In a number of in several of the clips, there was an opportunity to see children, black, white, and brown, that were together, and they were sharing this experience and reading this book. And there was a level of connection and openness that is so very important. In our conversations today, many adults are wondering, how do I learn? How do I understand more about a population of people that have experiences that I have not had? And one of the biggest challenges that as grown folk we find that we have to combat is a sense of guilt. The beauty in the One Book experience is that young minds have the opportunity to come together, to see each other, to learn about each other, and to be empowered to lift their voices in the hope that the greater population will see that it's truly the young people that are our future, and there's so much that we can learn from them. So these books, these One Books that are picked, are great for adults as well as young people. It's another opportunity to build a bridge of understanding. Staci, thank you so much. Latricia, thank you so much. Tasha, thank you so much. David, thank you so much. Susan, again, thank you so very, very much. And thanks to all of you who share with us one of your greatest commodities, and that's your time. We're honored to be able to be here to have these conversations so that we can learn more, move together, and really, really be able to manifest change and celebrate the fact that art is truly a pathway to health, healing, and enrichment for all of the citizens of our community. So from Johns Hopkins University and from the Straz Center for the Arts, thank you so very, very much. Until next time, take care, be safe, and be happy. Bye-bye.